The silence of a suburban house at 4 in the morning is heavy, but the sound of a metal suitcase zipper is much heavier. It was a cold Tuesday, and the hallway was pitch black, except for a tiny sliver of light coming from the kitchen. I walked downstairs to get a glass of water, thinking the house was empty. Instead, I found my 7-year-old grandson, Leo. Welcome back to Revenge with TN. Grab your snacks. Get comfortable, and remember the people in this story had every chance to do the right. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're gonna love it here. Leo was sitting quietly by the front door in his dinosaur pajamas. He wasn't crying, he was just waiting. His small blue backpack was stuffed to the brim with nothing but his favorite tattered pillow and a single left shoe. When he saw me, his eyes went wide with a mixture of hope and confusion. "Grandma, they forgot to wake me up," he whispered so softly I almost missed it. My heart didn't just break, it shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. I looked out the window at the driveway. My daughter's SUV was gone. The spot where it usually sat was just a dark, empty rectangle of concrete. They were already 2 states away, driving toward the airport for their big trip to Orlando. They had talked about this Disney vacation for 6 months, but as I looked at Leo's trembling lower lip, I realized the unthinkable had happened. They left him. My name is Leanne Vance, and I am 56 years old. I have spent my entire adult life building a real estate empire from the ground up, brick by brick. In my business, I have learned one very important rule. People will always show you exactly who they are if you look at the fine print. I thought I had raised my daughter, Brooke, to be a woman of character and compassion. I thought I had taught her that family is a circle that never breaks. But as I stood in that chilly foyer, wrapped in my robe and looking at Leo's pale face, I realized I had been blind. I had ignored the fine print of my own family for far too long. I am a woman who handles crises for a living, but looking at that little boy sitting on his suitcase made me feel completely powerless. I reached out and pulled him into a hug, feeling how cold his hands were. He had probably been sitting there for an hour, listening to the engines start and the tires crunch on the gravel, waiting for someone to come back for him. They never did. I knew then that my life was about to change. I wasn't just a grandmother anymore. I was a protector. I carried Leo to the kitchen and made him some warm cocoa, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I took my phone out and called Brooke. I called her 10 times, then 20, then 30. Every single call went straight to voicemail. My chest felt tight with a panic I couldn't describe. Was it an accident? Did they really think he was in the back seat? Finally, on the 31st try, the phone clicked open. I could hear the loud, frantic energy of an airport terminal in the background, the chime of boarding announcements and the hum of 1,000 travelers. "Mom, stop calling. We are literally boarding the plane." Brooke hissed into the receiver. Her voice was sharp and annoyed, not frantic. "Brooke, Leo is here with me," I said, my voice cracking. "You left him behind. He's sitting in his pajamas drinking cocoa." There was a long, cold silence on the other end. "Oh, Mom, it was a total mistake," she finally said, though she didn't sound surprised. "The alarm didn't go off for his room, and we were in such a rush to beat the traffic. We can't turn back now, or we'll miss the flight and lose thousands of dollars. Can you just keep him, please? We'll make it up to him." I hung up the phone because I couldn't bear to hear another word of her hollow excuses. I spent the next 2 hours trying to distract Leo with cartoons and pancakes, but my mind was racing. Then, the notification pinged on my phone. Brooke had posted to her Instagram story. I clicked it, expecting a post about how sad she was, or a message for Leo. Instead, I saw a bright, high-definition photo of Brooke, her husband Mark, and their 9-year-old daughter, Maya. They were all wearing matching Disney Squad t-shirts and giant Mickey ears. They were grinning ear to ear in front of the terminal gate. The caption read, "Finally, the trio trip we've dreamed of. Magic starts now." There was no mention of a mistake. There was no mention of a forgotten son. It was a deliberate celebration of a trio. Leo leaned over my shoulder to see what I was looking at. He recognized the shirts. He recognized the smiles. "Am I not part of the squad, Grandma?" he asked. The question was so simple and so devastating that I had to turn away so he wouldn't see the tears streaming down my face. At that moment, the accident theory died. I knew exactly what my daughter had done. She had pruned her family tree to make it look more perfect for her followers. That night, after I finally got Leo to fall asleep in the guest room, I sat in my home office with a glass of wine and my laptop. I didn't get angry. I got analytical. That is how I built my business. I started scrolling through Brooke's social media feeds, going back 3 years. I did a complete audit of her life. As the hours ticked by, a horrifying pattern began to emerge from the digital archives. In almost every vacation photo, Leo was the one holding the camera, or he was standing off to the far side, partially cropped out of the frame. I looked at the Christmas photos from last year. Maya was wearing a designer velvet dress that cost more than my first car, while Leo was in a pair of faded slacks and a shirt that looked 2 sizes too small. I looked at the birthday posts. For Maya's birthday, there were professional ponies and a tiered cake. For Leo's, there was a single photo of a grocery store cupcake. It wasn't just one missed trip to Disney. It was a systematic, quiet removal of a child who didn't fit Brooke's image of a high-end aesthetic life. He was the extra child, a background character in his own mother's movie. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. Mark and Brooke lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial house that I had paid the down payment for as a wedding gift. They drove 2 luxury SUVs that were currently leased through my real estate company to save them on taxes. I had been the silent engine behind their first-class lifestyle, giving them thousands of dollars in gifts every year to make sure my grandchildren lived well. But standing there in the middle of the night, I realized I was actually subsidizing the neglect of my own grandson. I was paying for the matching shirts that Leo didn't get to wear. I was paying for the VIP passes that didn't have his name on them. My daughter and her husband were living a life of luxury on my grace while treating my grandson like an unwanted boarder. I closed my laptop and stared out into the dark garden. I wasn't going to scream at them when they got back. I wasn't going to make a scene on Facebook. That is what people expect. Instead, I was going to use the very tools I used to build my empire to dismantle the comfortable reality they had built on Leo's tears. 7 days later, the squad returned. I was standing in the driveway when their SUV pulled in, covered in Florida dust. They climbed out, looking sun-kissed and exhausted in the best way possible. Maya jumped out first, clutching a $400 custom lightsaber from Galaxy's Edge and wearing 3 different sets of expensive ears around her neck. She looked like a walking gift shop. Leo heard the car and ran out of the front door, his face lit up with a pure, desperate hope. He just wanted a hug. He wanted to know he was missed. Brooke climbed out of the driver's seat and barely looked at him. She reached into the back and handed him a crumpled, greasy paper bag from an airport gift shop. "Here you go, buddy," she said distractedly, checking her phone. "Sorry we didn't bring more, but the gift shops were so crowded and we ran out of room in the suitcases." Leo opened the bag. Inside was a small, stale bag of airport pretzels and a plastic keychain that said Orlando on it. It wasn't even a Disney keychain. It was the kind of thing you buy at a gas station when you realize you forgot someone. Leo held the pretzels like they were made of lead. I decided to play the part of the doting, oblivious grandmother for just a little longer. I invited them all inside for a welcome home dinner. I spent the afternoon cooking their favorite meal, acting as if everything was perfectly fine. As we sat around the large mahogany table, the air was filled with Maya's excited chatter about meeting princesses and riding the fastest roller coasters. Mark raved about the VIP tour guides who moved them to the front of every line. "It was worth every penny," Mark said. Leaning back in his chair with a smug smile, I waited for a lull in the conversation. "So," I said smoothly, "Leo's 8th birthday is coming up in 2 weeks. What do you have planned for the big day?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mark and Brooke exchanged a quick, guilty look. "Oh, Mom," Brooke said, picking at her salad. "We actually spent the entire birthday budget on the Disney VIP passes. Those things are incredibly expensive. We talked about it, and we think we'll just do a small cake here at the house. Leo won't mind, right, buddy? You're a big boy." Leo didn't look up from his plate. He just nodded quietly. That was the final confirmation I needed. My daughter wasn't just broke or disorganized. She was choosing where to invest her love. and Leo was a bad investment in her eyes. Well, I said, my voice as cold as a winter morning. I suppose plans do change. Speaking of plans, I've decided to sell the beach house in Malibu. Brooke's fork hit her plate with a loud metallic clang. That beach house was the one she had assumed she would inherit one day. It was where she spent her summers posting beach vibe photos to her followers. But Mom, that's our summer spot, she cried, her voice rising in pitch. We already told Maya we'd take her there for her surfing lessons in July. I took a slow sip of my wine and looked her dead in the eye. I didn't give her a reason. I didn't mention Disney. I just gave her a thin, professional smile that I usually reserved for aggressive corporate raiders. I've just decided it's time to liquidate some assets, Brooke. Sometimes things just happen. You know how it is. Alarms don't go off, and suddenly you're moving in a different direction. The color drained from her face. She knew exactly what I was saying. The next morning, I didn't go to my office. Instead, I met with a private investigator I had used for years during high-stakes real estate mergers and acquisitions. I didn't want him to find an affair. I wanted him to find the money. I gave him access to the accounts I had set up for the kids' futures. A few days later, he called me into his office. What he showed me made my blood boil. For the past 2 years, I had been giving Brooke and Mark $500 a month, specifically to deposit into Leo's college savings fund. It was supposed to be an untouchable trust. But the investigator showed me the ledger. Mark had been diverting those funds into a separate account. That account was used to pay for Maya's private gymnastics coaching, her designer wardrobe, and the very Disney trip they had just taken. They weren't just neglecting Leo. They were literally stealing his future to fund his sister's aesthetic life. My own daughter was a thief, and my grandson was her victim. I took the documents and put them in a secure folder. I wasn't ready to strike yet. I needed one more piece of evidence to ensure they could never wiggle out of the consequences. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Leo had been practicing for weeks for his lead role in the school play. He was playing the king, and he had memorized every single line. He was so proud of his golden cardboard crown. On the night of the performance, I arrived early and took a seat in the front row with my professional video camera. I looked around for Brooke and Mark. The play started. Leo walked onto the stage, his eyes scanning the crowd with a desperate, searching intensity. He looked at the seats where his parents should have been. They were empty. I found out later they had taken Maya to a last-minute gymnastics invitational 3 towns over because she had a chance to win a plastic trophy. I sat there in the dark theater, filming Leo's solo. He saw me, and for a second his face faltered. But then he stood taller, looked right into my lens, and performed like a star. He was brilliant. But the sadness in his eyes as he took his bow to an empty seat next to me was a debt I intended to collect with heavy interest. They had missed his crowning moment for a gymnastics meet. I waited until the following Thursday to make my move. I sent out a formal embossed invitation to Brooke and Mark. I told them I was hosting a legacy gala at a high-end hotel to celebrate my 25th anniversary in the real estate business. I hinted that I would be announcing my official succession plan, who would take over the company and the properties when I retired. To Brooke and Mark, this was the big one. This was the moment they would officially become millionaires on paper. They arrived at the hotel looking like suburban royalty. Brooke was in a $1,000 gown, and Mark was in a tailored tuxedo. They were glowing, smelling the blood in the water of my retirement. They spent the first hour of the gala mingling with my business partners, acting as if they were already the heads of the Vance empire. They had no idea that I had spent the last 48 hours talking to my lawyers and my board of directors. They had no idea that the legacy I was about to discuss wasn't the one they were expecting. The room was full of the city's elite, all waiting for my speech. The lights dimmed and a large projector screen lowered behind the podium. I've spent my life building a legacy, I began, my voice amplified and steady. But a legacy is not just about buildings and bank accounts. It is about values. I clicked a remote. The first slide was the photo Brooke had posted from the airport, the Disney squad in their matching shirts. The room murmured with awes at the cute family photo. Then, I clicked the next slide. It was the photo I took of Leo sitting on his suitcase in the dark hallway at 4 a.m., his little head drooping with exhaustion. Then I showed a side-by-side of the bank statements. The money I sent for Leo's college versus the receipts for Maya's VIP Disney tour. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the thick carpet. Brooke stood up, her face a mask of horror. "Mom, what are you doing?" she whispered, but the microphone picked up my response. "I am showing the board exactly what kind of management you provide, Brooke. I am showing them how you handle the assets I've entrusted to." Brooke tried to laugh it off, turning to the guests with a shaky smile. "Oh, Mom has such a wicked sense of humor. This is just a technical glitch in the presentation," she lied, her voice trembling. I didn't let her finish. I stepped closer to the microphone. "It is no glitch, Brooke. I've spent years funding a first-class life for you and Mark, believing you were building a home based on love and equality. But I have realized I've been subsidizing a link in this family that doesn't value the whole chain. You treat your son like a line item you can delete to save costs. In my business, we call that a toxic asset." I looked at Mark, who was trying to hide behind a pillar. "And Mark, using Leo's college fund to pay for luxury vacations is not just bad parenting. It's a breach of trust." The elite of the city, the people Brooke desperately wanted to impress, were now looking at them with utter disgust. The social media queen was being unmasked in front of the only audience that actually mattered to her. Her perfect world was cracking in real time. I wasn't done. I pulled a legal document from the podium. "Effective tonight," I announced, "I am restructuring the Leanne Vance Trust. The colonial house you currently reside in has been moved into a protected educational trust for Leo Vance. It will be managed by an independent firm, not by his parents. Furthermore, the leases on your vehicles have been terminated. Since those are company assets and you are no longer affiliated with my firm, the cars must be returned by noon tomorrow." The room gasped. Brooke looked like she was going to faint. "You can continue to live in the house for now," I added, "but you will be required to pay market-rate rent directly into Leo's college fund. If you miss a single payment, the trust is authorized to begin eviction proceedings immediately. My grandson will have his future, even if I have to charge his own parents to build it." I walked off the stage without looking back. I had spent 25 years being a builder, but that night, I felt much more satisfied as a wrecking ball. I had finally stopped paying for the squad to leave Leo behind. The fallout was immediate and chaotic. The next morning, I was sitting on my porch when a flatbed tow truck arrived to take the luxury SUVs away. Mark was out in the driveway in his bathrobe, screaming at the driver, but the driver just pointed to the repossession order signed by my company. Brooke called me, hysterical. "Mom, you can't do this. We have no way to get Maya to her gymnastics. We can't afford $3,000 a month in rent." Your family." I remained perfectly calm, sipping my tea. "You told me Leo wouldn't mind a small cake because he's a big boy, Brooke," I said. "Well, you and Mark are big adults. I'm sure you won't mind a small apartment and a bus pass. You can make it up to yourselves later." I hung up. 2 days later, the first rent check was due. Mark called, his voice cracking with desperation. He said they couldn't afford both the rent and Maya's elite private school tuition. I told him he should probably look into the public school system, the one Leo attends. Or I suggested, "You could sell those $400 lightsabers. I hear they have a great resale value on eBay." Brooke didn't take it lying down. She decided to go to war. She hired a cut-rate lawyer and tried to sue me for intentional infliction of emotional distress. She actually had the nerve to claim in court documents that I was kidnapping Leo's affection and using my wealth to brainwash him against his parents. She thought she could play the victim. However, my legal team was the best money could buy. During the preliminary hearing, my lawyer didn't say much. He simply pulled out a tablet and played the high-definition footage from my doorbell camera. It showed the entire 4 a.m. incident. The SUV pulling away, the house falling silent, and then Leo opening the door and sitting on his suitcase for an hour in the dark. The judge watched the footage in stony silence. When it was over, he looked at Brooke's lawyer and asked, Does your client wish to explain why a 7-year-old was left on a porch in the middle of the night while she drove to Disney World? The lawsuit was dismissed before lunch. Brooke left the courthouse with her head down, dodging the glares of the court staff. She was realizing that a perfect Instagram feed didn't hold much weight in a court of law. But then, the story took its first major twist. During the discovery phase of the dismissed lawsuit, my legal team gained access to Mark's full financial history to verify their distress. We found out that the college fund wasn't the only thing Mark was messing with. He hadn't just been skipping payments. He had been taking out small personal loans and credit cards in Leo's name. He had stolen the identity of his own 7-year-old son to fund his lifestyle. Because Leo's social security number was clean, Mark had racked up nearly $20,000 in debt under a child's name. It was a felony. When my lawyer showed me the credit card statements, charges for high-end golf clubs, and luxury spa days for Brooke, I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just neglect or favoritism anymore. This was a criminal enterprise operating inside my family. Mark had been betting on the fact that no one would ever check a child's credit score until he was 18. He hadn't counted on a grandmother who knew how to audit a ledger. I handed the files over to the district attorney. I didn't hesitate for a second. The second twist was even more devastating. As the private investigator dug deeper into Mark's spa day expenses, he noticed a recurring payment to a woman in a neighboring state. It wasn't a spa, it was a private bank transfer. We discovered that Mark had a whole other life. He had a 10-year-old daughter from a brief fling he'd had just before he married Brooke. He had been paying hush-money child support for a decade to keep the woman from filing a formal case that would alert me or Brooke. He was using the vacation money and gift money I gave them to maintain a secret second family. Brooke had no idea. She thought she was the center of his world, the queen of their Disney squad. In reality, she was just the person who provided him access to my bank account. When the investigator handed me the photos of Mark's other child, I felt a strange sense of pity for Brooke. She had been so busy trying to curate a perfect life that she had failed to notice her own husband was a stranger. I decided she needed to see the truth, not from me, but from the evidence. The house of cards finally collapsed during a forced mediation session at my lawyer's office. Brooke arrived, still acting defiant, demanding I reinstate her inheritance. My lawyer calmly laid out the folders. First, the evidence of Mark's identity theft against Leo. Brooke's eyes went wide. "Mark, what is this?" she whispered. Mark tried to bluster, but then my lawyer laid out the second folder, the photos and bank transfers to his secret daughter. The perfect couple imploded right there in the conference room. Brooke didn't just scream. She lunged across the table. The screaming match lasted for 40 minutes as 10 years of lies came pouring out. Mark finally realized he was trapped and walked out of the room, leaving Brooke sobbing on the floor. She had lost her husband, her cars, her status, and her mother's respect in one fell swoop. She stayed in that chair for a long time, looking at the photos of a 10-year-old girl who looked exactly like Mark. She was finally seeing the fine print of her own life, and it was written in the ink of betrayal. Her Disney squad had never actually existed. After the meltdown, Brooke came to my house, begging for help. She wanted me to pay for an expensive divorce lawyer to take Mark for everything he has. She thought this common enemy would finally bring us back together, that I would go back to being her personal ATM, now that she was a victim. I sat her down in the same kitchen where Leo had his cocoa. "I will pay for a lawyer, Brooke," I said firmly, "but not for your revenge. I will pay for a lawyer to ensure Leo is protected, and that Mark goes to prison for what he did to that boy's credit. But as for you, the era of first class is over." I told her she had to move out of the colonial house immediately. I had already signed the papers to sell it. "You're moving into a 2-bedroom apartment," I told her. "It's near the bus line, and it's within your salary range. You're going to learn how to be a mother to both your children without my money as a cushion." She cried and called me cruel, but for the first time in years, her words had no power over me. I wasn't being cruel, I was being a mirror. The final move was the most difficult. When Brooke was packing to move to her apartment, she tried to take the family heirlooms, the silver sets, the antique paintings, and even the expensive mahogany dining table where she had once dismissed Leo's birthday. She claimed they were hers by right. I walked into the house with a clipboard and 2 movers. I showed her the inventory list. Every single high-value item in the house had been legally gifted to the Leo Vance Trust months ago as part of the restructuring. I had even moved the family photo albums, the ones she had used to crop Leo out. "You didn't want him in the photos, Brooke," I said, watching her reach for a silver frame. "Why on earth would you want the frames? These belong to the child you left behind. He's the only one in this family who actually values what they represent." I watched her walk out of that house with nothing but her clothes and Maya's gymnastics trophies. She was finally experiencing the empty, sweet feeling she had forced on Leo. She was the one being left behind, and this time, there was no one to make her cocoa. The biggest twist of all, however, was hidden in my own office. Brooke assumed that even if she lost the house and the cars, she was still my only child and would eventually inherit my multi-million-dollar real estate company. She thought she just had to wait me out. A month after the divorce was finalized and Mark was indicted, I invited her to my office for one last meeting. I showed her my updated finalized will. I wasn't leaving her a single penny. I wasn't even leaving her a piece of jewelry. Every asset, every building, and every cent of my liquid wealth was being moved into a charitable foundation for neglected and invisible children. The board of that foundation would be chaired by Leo when he turned 25, provided he completed his education, which was already fully funded. "You spent your life trying to be a queen, Brooke," I told her as she stared at the documents in stunned silence. "But a queen without a heart is just a woman with a fancy hat. You aren't my heir anymore. You were just a woman I used to know." I watched her realize that her future was now as empty as Leo's backpack had been that Tuesday morning. The downfall was complete. Mark was sentenced to 3 years for identity theft and financial fraud. Brooke is currently working 2 retail jobs just to keep up with the rent on her small apartment and Maya's basic needs. Maya, no longer the golden child of a wealthy estate, had to leave her elite gymnastics club and join a community center program. Brooke watches from the sidelines of her own life, seeing my social media posts, not of aesthetic vacations, but of Leo's genuine smiles. She sees us volunteering at the foundation or hiking in the mountains. She is finally understanding what it's like to be the extra person in a world that used to revolve around her. She sends me emails begging for just a small loan, but I don't even open them. I've learned that some people only value the light when they are standing in the dark. She had her chance to be part of the squad, but she chose to drive away. Now, she's just a ghost haunting the edges of a family that moved on without her. She is learning the hardest lesson of all. You can't build a palace on a foundation of neglect. Today, I am sitting on a balcony overlooking the Grand Canyon. The air is crisp, and the sun is dipping below the rim, painting the rocks in shades of deep purple and gold. Leo is standing next to me, leaning against the railing. He's taller now, his shoulders broader, and the shadow that used to live in his eyes has been replaced by a quiet, steady confidence. He's not looking for a camera, he's just looking at the view. He turned to me and grabbed my hand. "Grandma," he said, his voice dropping an octave as he enters his teenage years. "I was thinking about that Disney trip. Why did you pick me that morning? You could have just called a sitter and gone back to sleep." I looked at him and tucked a stray hair behind his ear, the same way I did when he was 7. "Because Leo," I said, "you weren't the backup plan. You weren't the mistake or the extra baggage. You were the reason for the whole map. You were my first choice, and you are my only choice." He smiled, a real, beaming smile that no Instagram filter could ever replicate. We walked back to our suite together, 2 people who found their own magic, far away from the kingdom that tried to leave them behind. The suitcase is packed, the locks are changed, and the Disney squad is officially history. But I have to ask you, the jury, did Leanne go too far by nuking her daughter's life, or was this the only way to save Leo? Drop a in the comments if you think she's a hero, or tell me why she was too cold. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next receipt we pull from the Vance files. The truth is always in the fine print.